Hey guys, I'm here recording my review and also a detailed plot description of the book City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. There are already a whole bunch of books, a bunch of videos, with a review of this book. So I'm going to keep my review short and mostly do a spoiler video about the plot of the book in detail and what I thought of the plot of the book, just to try to get a discussion going because I don't know anybody else personally who's read these books, and I really wanted to hash some things out, especially as the trilogy goes on, because there are absolutely no videos on the two sequel books, City of Blades and City of Miracles. So, thanks for tuning into my video. I'll let you know when the spoilers start. I'll just start with a quick review and overview, and then I'm going to get into the heavy duty spoiler stuff. So if you haven't read the book, that would be a good time to step away. Um, so yeah, my name's Keela Rose, by the way. Thank you for taking a listen to my little video here. So anyway, City of Stairs, I thought was a really good book. Um, I had a few problems with it. Some of them are kind of nitpicky, but overall, I liked it a lot. I really love the characters. I love that the main character is a woman of color, which is really important to me as a woman of color. I love the fact that it creates a really unique and interesting world, although there are some unfortunate similarities to the world that the same author created for the book Foundry Side, which is going to be its own trilogy. The new one is coming out in January, I think. So, anyway, it's just a little bit um, similar to that, a little too similar for my taste, but it does manage to stand on its own. And I really like the fact that it instantly pulls you into this world with a cool murder mystery plot. I really love murder mysteries. I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan, so that was a big hook for me. And I really like the fact that it involves religion because that's also something that I love to read about and love to write about. It's a really interesting topic, and it also pulls in a lot of interesting parallels to our world today, especially in the United States of America. And I'm not sure where Robert Jackson Bennett is from, but I think he's probably American based on some of the things that he writes about and some of the themes in this book. So, overall, good book, really good characters, really interesting world building, and that's the short of it. If you want a more detailed review, like I said, there are a lot of other videos on YouTube available where people review the book in more detail than that. But what I'm really more interested in is diving into the plot of the book and what I really liked about it and what I didn't like about it. And just kind of discussing where we go from here leading into book two. So, you've been warned. Spoilers from this point on. So basically, City of Stairs is about Shara, who is investigating a murder, as I mentioned earlier. But in order to understand why the murder she's investigating is important, you have to get into this whole background and world building. And I think that the author really handles the world building in an impressive way. It doesn't usually feel like too much exposition. There are a few scenes where it's obviously exposition, and one character's like, oh, let me teach you all about the divinities and the gods. But it's interesting, so, you can kind of give that a pass because you have to have that in a fantasy book. I mean, it's inevitable. So he handles it really well. Basically, this takes place in a world where one whole continent full of people had actual living gods, which they called divinities. There were originally 6 of them, and then one of them mysteriously disappeared. We later find out that actually 2 of them mysteriously disappeared, but everyone knows that the first one disappeared, a goddess named Olvos, although they just call her a god, not a goddess. The genders are a teeny bit fluid with these divinities. Um, and she disappeared well over I don't know, 1,000 years or something before the events of the story took place. Whereas this other god, as we find out later, just kind of quietly disappeared maybe a few hundred years before the story took place, and people just kind of didn't talk about the fact that he had actually disappeared. It's a little bit hard to know exactly what happened because these divinities made it possible for this continent full of people who were like the chosen people of the gods and blessed by the gods and living in all these cities that had been constructed by the gods, made it possible for those people to go out and conquer all these other lands and worlds where there were no divinities and where the people didn't have that extraordinary power and protection. So basically, all of these people from the divine continent, let's call it, that's not what the book calls it, but it's just easier that way. All these people from the divine continent subjugated and enslaved the other people, particularly a race of people from these islands called Saipur. And I hope I'm pronouncing that more or less correct based on the spelling. So the Saipuris are basically dark-skinned people. All of them have names that sound more or less Indian, as in Indian from India, not Christopher Columbus's stupidity. And the people from the continent all have names that sound kind of Russian or Polish, and they're described as lighter skinned. Then there's another whole group of people who are obviously based on Northern Europeans and Scandinavians, and they're called Draylings. But it's unclear, one of a few things that really could have been made more clear in this book. It's unclear whether the Draylings were ever actually slaves. It's really not clear, so I don't know. But anyway, the Saipuris were definitely slaves, and not only were they slaves, they were really treated, well, obviously all slaves are treated poorly, but they were treated particularly brutally by the Continentals, and they, of course, eventually rose up. They were led by a dude named the Kaj, which I think means king, based on the way they use the book, the way they use the name more as a title, as both a title and a name sometimes. So they call him the Kaj. And the Kaj somehow developed a way to kill the gods. And he killed, or so they thought, he killed 4 of them. It was assumed that he killed all of them. And then later, as we find out, he actually only killed 3 of them. So 3 of the gods, the original 6 gods, are definitely gone. And 2, as I said, disappeared. And one of them, the trickster god Zhukov, apparently was killed, but we later find out, nope, not so much. And this is why I thought it was honestly too similar to his book Foundry Side, where he has these godlike creatures called the Hierophants. And it turns out that the Hierophants aren't actually dead like everyone thought they were, excuse me. So, of course, in this book, it turns out that the gods aren't as dead as everyone thought they were either. But it does tease that on the back of the book, so it's not as if they were trying to hide it as a surprise, but I don't know. If I hadn't read Foundry Side and I hadn't read the back of the book, I think I probably would have figured that out anyway. It's kind of obvious. So I don't think it was supposed to be a twist. I think it was just kind of an inevitability. So anyway, the Saipuris, because they never had any divine protection or any gods helping them out, were very self-sufficient and actually learned how to do things. Although we later find out that, oh no, they weren't really as self-sufficient as we thought. Actually, their power came secretly from the gods too, which I thought was kind of a cop-out because it takes away the agency of these people. But anyway, it does allow the Saipuris, after they've rebelled and they've killed the gods, to take over. Because once the gods die, there's this event that's referred to in the book as the blink. Because in the blink of an eye, all of the things that the gods built and created were destroyed. So basically, this whole city that had been built by the gods, like every building they created, just vanished or went underground or it used to be big, but now it's little, or it mixed with some other building because of the weird reality shift that took place when all the magic, godly power was suddenly wiped out of the world. So that's why the city is called City of Stairs. It's actually the city of Bulikov, where this first book takes place. But Bulikov was like the center of all the six divinities' powers. And when the blink happened, it left behind a bunch of staircases that led to nowhere. And it's a really cool image, one that honestly I wish they had put on the front of the book instead of the picture we did get. I mean, the picture we did get is pretty cool, but there's no real illustration of what this city looks like with all these random towering staircases that lead to nowhere, because some of them are described as quite massive, as if the building they led to was enormous. And it's a little bit, it doesn't really make that much sense, to be honest. It sounds like something that he thought would be a cool visual and a cool idea. And maybe, he had this image in his mind and that's what he built the story out from, in which case, you can't really fault your sources of inspiration. As a writer, I get it, but I just don't think it made logical sense, because if the gods were controlling the city, why not give people elevators? Like, why have these giant staircases? And when their buildings disappeared, why didn't the staircases disappear too? Were they not made by divinities as well? What's keeping them up now? Generally, a staircase needs a support system. So if the support systems for the buildings disappeared, and by the way, it specifically mentioned that buildings like collapsed and all the people who were in them died and were never heard from again. Why wouldn't these stairs also crumble and collapse? So there's really no logic to it. It also represents what I consider to be a missed opportunity in the book, because there are so many things you could do with this imagery of stairs that go nowhere, and combining that with the divine magical power that these divinities left behind. Like, why not have more scenes in the book where people actually run up the stairs, or maybe there's like secretly still a building attached to the stairs, but nobody realized it because nobody had run all the way up there. So when you step off the edge of the stairs, you actually vanish into a building. Or maybe people have to do tests of their faith by walking off of the stairs. Um, so it just seems like a missed opportunity. And I pictured these stairs being more like an MC Escher painting, creating these cool paradoxes of themselves, um, or like the movie Inception, for example. I mean, this whole city basically defied logic in a way, because the gods were able to use magic to make the stairs happen. Not the stairs, but like all the buildings in the city. And the reason that those buildings vanished was because it wasn't the laws of physics holding them up, it was divine power. So it's like the whole city kind of unzipped itself and folded in on itself. And I just think he could have taken that idea a lot farther in terms of his descriptions, especially his descriptions, and but also in terms of using it as a plot device. So that's just a missed opportunity there. But again, it's a cool image, so who cares, right? I'm just being nitpicky. So anyway, here in the City of Stairs, um, there is now, what do you call it? Like the police presence, an occupation. That's the word. Thanks. Thanks, brain. You got it. There's now an occupation where the Sepuris are taking control of everything, and they have made it illegal for the continental people to know their own history. They've taken all these divine artifacts and locked them away in a warehouse. They've made it illegal for people to even mention the fact that there used to be gods. So they've really gone, to the extreme to obliterate these people's past in order to move forward. And these people are really resentful of that because they want to be able to know their own history. And they're also, of course, resentful that their former slaves are now in charge. So they have a bunch of like racist names for them. And it's kind of a strange flip flop of this whole master slave dynamic. And it's, kind of an interesting political thing. Um, like I said, it reminds me of what's going on in the United States right now, where you have a lot of people arguing about whether we should celebrate our history as a racist slave owning society with all these, statues of Civil War veterans and Civil War generals that are still up in certain parts of the country, or whether those should be taken down and kind of obliterate that history. Is it okay to celebrate your history when your history is violent and oppressive and, reminds people of all this pain and disgusting servitude that was forced upon them? So I really like that dynamic, and I like the fact that both sides were presented, but obviously as a descendant of slaves myself, I had clearly picked a side. So it was just interesting to see that played out in a fantasy world. But yeah, I'm like Team Saipuri all the way. So anyway, this Saipuri historian comes along investigating all this old history of the divinities, and then he winds up getting murdered. A lot of people hated him because he knew more about the divinities than the actual continental people did. So basically, who are the suspects for his murder? Everyone in town. And so they send this woman, Shara, to come investigate. And Shara is a spy for her country, but she's posing as a cultural attaché. But it seems kind of obvious that, like, everyone would figure out pretty quickly that she's not what she says she is, and that she is, in fact, there to investigate the murder and not just to, be a cultural representative of the ministry or whatever her silly cover story was. Because she immediately fires the old ambassador and takes his job. And it's like, well, who else would have that kind of power? So her flimsy story falls apart pretty quickly, especially because there are already people in town who know her real identity, which honestly seems, just really stupid. Like, one of them is her ex-boyfriend from when she was in college. And it's like, how would you not know that your ex-boyfriend lives in the capital and that he's still pretty rich and pretty important? I mean, they don't have Facebook or whatever, she's not exactly following him on Instagram, but, you'd think that if she was really as plugged into all these different things going on because she's such an accomplished spy and she's been a spy, it's emphasized for well over 10 years because she really wants to go home, but her politically powerful aunt forces her to stay out and forces her to continue being a spy for, again, fairly flimsy reasons, as it turns out. So she would have known. Like, she would have had some inkling that this guy lived in Bulakov and that she was probably going to run into him. So her surprise and dismay that she has to go to a party at his house really didn't make any sense either. But whatever. So she brings her secretary, again, another flimsy thing, because her so-called secretary is this giant, hulking, like 7-foot, one-eyed, muscle-bound guy from, again, like the northern part of the world where he's supposed to be kind of like a Scandinavian. So, ultra blonde and pale and everything, especially compared to her, because she's a dark-skinned Saipuri. Like, he stands out in a crowd. Why would anybody believe that this dude was just a secretary? Especially because he's all scarred and hulking and, clearly like, threatening people right away. So the whole thing just really didn't make a lot of sense. It's like, everyone in all these other cities where she was supposedly such an accomplished spy, they must have all been idiots to believe her cover story for a second, because it doesn't make any sense at all that these people would really blend in as well as the author tries to pretend that they have in the past. So that didn't make sense to me. But anyway, that aside, you suspend your disbelief, whatever. They're great spies. They're so experienced. And Sigrid, her big hulking brooding, monstrous secretary slash bodyguard is actually, surprise, an accomplished killer. And that's basically what he does best, as they say in one chapter, where he kills some people who have broken into this party at Shara's ex-boyfriend's house, and they've killed the guards, and they're holding some people hostage. And he just fucking goes to town on these guys. Like, this is actually one of the cooler scenes in the book, because Robert Jackson Bennett does a really good job of viscerally describing the carnage that Sigrid inflicts on people. Just like broken bones, blood everywhere, and it's basically like an action movie scene. And the fact that he's able to wreak this much havoc, like with his bare hands, all he uses is his hands and a little knife. He doesn't have any giant weapons at all. Is pretty impressive. So Sigrid, the scary dude, really not realistic that anyone would buy that he's just a cultural attache's personal secretary. Like, yeah, nice try, guy. We're on to you. So anyway, they're investigating this crime, and as we go through and learn a lot more about the divinities and the histories, a lot of little nitpicky things came to me. For one thing, and this also happened with the Book Foundry side, there are errors in this book, like actual grammar errors, and in one case, like a word was missing that needed to be there. And for one chapter, there was no chapter title. There were titles for every other chapter except that one. So it didn't really make sense why this one was missing a chapter title. So there's just really weird, sloppy stuff in the final formatting of the book that I found quite odd. I don't know why editors didn't catch that stuff. The book is also written in present tense, which is jarring at first, but eventually I got used to it and didn't really notice it. I don't know that it would have made a difference if it was written in the past tense, so it's fine. And I do like some of his writing. He does a lot of good metaphors and similes. He's really on point with the snappy dialogue and that kind of a thing. And I really like the fact that he tried to come up with realistic names that weren't necessarily your typical fantasy names, but like typical fantasy names, unfortunately, some of them were hard to pronounce. And my other nitpicky thing would be just like the font that was used for the chapter titles. I thought was a little cartoonish. I also would have appreciated a table of contents and a map. I love it when fantasy stories come with maps in the front so you can get an idea of what the world looks like and kind of center yourself geographically. And then for some reason the book is filled with all these lists and outlines. And it's very jarring. It's like you go from reading a book to reading a report. So I thought that was weird. I don't think they should have formatted it like that. Okay, we get that the character is organized and she thinks in a very organized way, but actual outline bullet point format is a little too much. Okay, so we get through all of that stuff. We go through, we try to figure out who killed this historian, who turned out to be kind of a friend of Shara's, but that was also a little bit thin. It wasn't clear that she really had a deep bond with him. It appeared that she only met him very briefly for maybe a week or something while she was training him before he took his post in the city. So I didn't really buy that she felt so close to him after such a short period of time as his trainer. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me either. But as the mystery goes on and they start to encounter evidence that the divine presence has not really gone from the city, and they discover a few things, a few of the weaknesses in Robert Jackson Bennett's writing start to show themselves. Like, for example, at one point they meet a divine creature, and he had mentioned that the divinities would make these weird, monstrous creatures, and they had that power, but when they died, most of their creatures were also killed by the Kaj and his army. So apparently, this one creature survives, and he describes the creature, but the way he described it, I found it hard to picture exactly what the creature was. And this could just be my own problem, not necessarily his writing, but I would have liked more description in general because I felt it was kind of lacking in certain areas. Like it was hard to visualize the world as completely as I would have liked. Um, so basically, as they go through trying to discover all this stuff, Chara reconnects with her ex-boyfriend. It turns out her ex-boyfriend has an evil twin, but he's not really a twin. He's just a long-lost brother, who turns out to be the bad guy. So it's kind of a soap opera plot twist, in all honesty. And that one was a bit predictable. But then the really weird part is that after it's revealed that her ex-boyfriend's brother is the bad guy, and they're caught by him, and he's saying all these hokey, cartoon villainy bad guy things to her about his plan and calling her names and stuff, and it all just seems very cardboard, cookie cutter. And then all of a sudden, he gets killed. Like, his whole big plan is to bring one of the gods back, the god that everyone thought was dead, but is not really dead, and also the god that disappeared and no one talked about it. This one turned out to be the god of judgment. And there's this whole subset of people on the continent who followed this god, and they were all about judgment and punishment. And, that's also kind of an interesting thing because, of course, a lot of religions involve self-punishment and self-denial and following all these weird rules. And that kind of encapsulates that whole thing about how people love to punish themselves and love to follow rules that really don't mean anything. Like, don't eat fish on Friday and, don't eat pork and this and that. So he really kind of does a good job of skewering that side of Christianity because this god named Kolkan wrote all these stupid rules about how women should dress, and the people who follow this religion, they apparently stoned a woman to death because she got a boyfriend 3 years after her husband died, and they can't stand it when women show any flesh at all, and this kind of a thing. So it's like super hardcore, like, the worst of Christianity and Islam and Orthodox Judaism all wrapped into one kind of a thing. So this god Kolkan is being brought out of his prison, where it turns out that the other gods put him because he was just going way too far with the punishment shit, and they got tired of it. So they locked him up and erased all of the mentions of him and all of the murals and statues and all that people had put up of him. And they locked away his pet monsters, one of whom gets free, and they have to fight it at some point in the book. But basically, this is the one that her ex-boyfriend's twin brother, not twin again, but very similar looking, brother was trying to free. So he does free him. And then the god says some weird shit like, you didn't bring me the flame and the sparrow. And then he kills the dude. He kills all of his followers. And it's like, wah wah. You literally spent years and years and years putting this plan into motion, like decades, putting this plan into motion to bring the gods back. And he has a huge villain monologue about all the work and preparation that he did. And then he lets the god out, and the god just fucking stomps his shit, like, immediately. Immediately! So, it was kind of funny. I don't know if Robert Jackson Bennett meant it to be funny, but you can kind of see, like, the irony he was going for there. Like, oh, this god you brought back that, you killed a bunch of people to bring back into the world. Yeah, he judged you pretty harshly, too. Apparently you weren't pure enough. So that was just comical. And then, of course, her ex-boyfriend, like, valiantly dies to save her and this is actually a pretty cool scene, my favorite scene in the book, to be honest, where he faces down this god and actually gets to tell the god, because this guy is actually gay or bisexual at the very least, and he's been living his whole life in the closet and coming to all this psychological and even physical harm because he couldn't be who he was. So in the end, he gets to give, this a big "this is why you suck" speech to the god and tell him "fuck you," but because this book doesn't use like the usual "frack you," sci-fi, fake F word type of stuff. People really do curse in the book, which I thought was cool, and they even have sex occasionally, which I thought was very cool. None of this Brandon Sanderson Mormon shit. Like, it's real people doing real things. So yeah, he gets to give this big speech to the god, and then the god kills him pretty brutally. But the fact that he got to speak his mind to his god was a good way to go out, in my opinion. So after that, however, things really kind of fall apart. Like, that would have been a cool climax, if Shara had been able to fight the god right then and there because she had her weapon on her, or if she, even better, she couldn't fight the god, and then the next book had to deal with like the consequences of this god being free. But instead, we have this second climax, or an extended climax. I don't know what you want to call it, but it really didn't work for me, where there's this big military battle and Shara takes some drugs that allow her to communicate better with the gods, and somehow taking these drugs not only lets her communicate but gives her godlike powers, which made no sense, except maybe it turned out that she was just being possessed by the lost goddess Olvos, and that's what was giving her her powers, but that wasn't clear. And the other gods thought she was Olvos, because it turns out that it wasn't just Kolkan who was revived, it was also Jukov, the trickster god. He didn't really get killed. Instead, he put himself in Kolkan's prison to hide from the Kaj, because he was so afraid that he would be killed like the other three gods that the Kaj killed. And when he hid in the prison with Kolkan, it somehow merged him with Kolkan. So when Kolkan flips his hood back, he's got like Jukov's face sticking out of his neck and Jukov's arm sticking out of his torso. And the whole thing is just bizarre. I'm just like, what? This doesn't make any sense. And then there's this huge battle while Shara's on drugs, and that didn't make any sense. And one of the characters gives a big, rousing battle speech that didn't rouse me one bit. And then, like, they win, I guess, because the god, instead of continuing to smash everybody, just gives up. And after like 5 minutes of fighting, it's like, boo-hoo, people don't like me anymore. Because there's this whole running thread throughout the book that the power of the gods came from the people. So if the people wanted something, the gods would change to be what the people wanted and give them what they wanted. And then because they got that thing, the people wanted something else, and the gods would change again. So it was kind of just like a weird theological thing. It reminded me of the remake of Clash of the Titans. In the second movie they made from that, total crap movies, by the way. I'm saving you time. You don't have to watch them. But the second one is called Wrath of the Titans. And you've got this scene with Ralph Fiennes playing Hades and Liam Neeson playing Zeus, where they talk about how because people don't pray to them anymore, they're losing their power and they're fading from existence because people don't believe in them anymore. And the whole thing is very Peter Pan, like, oh, clap your hands if you believe in fairies. Clap your hands and Tinkerbell will come back to life. I just thought it was stupid. And this seems to be somewhat similar that Robert Jackson Bennett was going for. But it's all just too muddled, and he threw it all in at the last minute, and it just didn't work for me at all. So I just really didn't like the way that all went down. Then at the end of the book, the very, very end, we get the pieces in motion where Shara is now going to go back to her homeland and become the prime minister, and she's kicking her her evil auntie out, because it turns out that evil auntie was the one who had this historian killed all along. Um, because the historian found out that not only is Shara a descendant of the Kaj, this guy who killed all the gods, but she's also a descendant of the gods themselves, because the Kaj's mother was one of these divine children or something like that. It was a little unclear whether she was like the child of the god or if she was a creation of the god. I don't really remember. But anyway, this apparently was such a big deal that it could have the power to destroy this woman's entire career, and that's why she had him killed, because he found this secret out about her and her family. So that could have been set up a lot better too, you know, like if he had written more about the children of the gods, and how people view them now. Like he did write about how the Sepuris try to avoid any association with the gods because, of course, the gods cause them all this pain and devastation. So they don't want that at all. So that did make a little bit of sense, but he definitely could have built it up a little bit more. So anyway, the book comes to an end, and the people are kind of scattered because Sigrid, her secretary slash bodyguard, as it turns out, is actually a lost prince for his people. So he's going to go home and try to straighten his homeland out. And then this other character who'd been helping her all along, I gotta see the pronunciation of her name. Sorry, one second. The General Mulagesh is on her way to an island somewhere to retire, and she lost her arm in the battle. So I haven't mentioned Mulagesh, but way more about her in my next video. This is already pretty long. The next book is called City of Blades, and Mulagesh is the star of that one. So I'll talk more about her in that one, because no one's made a video for that book yet. So if you like this video, I hope you will take time to check that one out as well. Sorry, this one ran a little bit long. I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter and tighter for the next one. But thanks for sticking around. My name's Keela Rose, and I'll see you in the pages.